Hey guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to talk about why it's important to look penniless in the public record. I have an expert attorney, Amanda Wynalda, who deals with this stuff day in and day out, and I really want to go over three things, which is the why we do these types of strategies, how they work and how you can implement it, and number three, what bad information is out there that exists on TikTok and Instagram. So first off, welcome and thank you for coming in and joining me.
Thanks, Zoe.
And if you can, let's just dive right on in.
Sure. So we're really looking to achieve security through obscurity. That's something you like to say, right? And it's the idea that if there are litigious lawyers out there and there are people who are really not willing to do their own work and wanting to take the easy road and get what you have. And so we want to make it appear as if you have nothing, at least from the public record standpoint. Now, this doesn't mean you don't wear your fancy watch or you don't drive your nice car, but your assets, the things that are building your wealth, your rental properties, your personal residence, your brokerage accounts, things like this, we don't want those to be easily searchable on the public record. And the reason is that if you're in any type of accident, if you have a tenant who is suing you, or if you're even just unlucky enough to be one in a line of cars in a 7-car pileup, the attorneys are going to look for that pot of gold. And you can sue a homeless person and get a judgment, but they're what we call judgment proof, meaning you're never going to get paid off of that. So the attorneys are going to go after the parties who have money and who have assets.
Yeah, and the calculation looks something like this. Let's say that you are potentially a defendant. Somebody believes they might have a claim that is valid against a group of people. Maybe we call them defendants, right? So the plaintiff is that party that believes that they've been hurt. So let's just say, I'll use a real life example. You're a tenant and you believe that the property manager did something wrong, and by virtue of the fact that you're in that property, the landowner did something wrong. So you start looking and saying, what assets do these people have? Number one is, do I have a valid claim? So if I'm the attorney looking at it, I'm saying, what are the chances of me winning that lawsuit? And then multiply that by what are the chances of me collecting on that lawsuit, which is why so many lawyers immediately come out the gate with what insurance is there, what assets are there. If they don't know, if they cannot tell, quite often the lawsuit never occurs. And that's the best lawsuit, is the one that you completely avoid. So that is what they are looking at, and that's what we're trying to get at here, right?
Yeah, 100%, because in the personal injury realm, attorneys work on what's called contingency. So a plaintiff who believes they've been injured doesn't have to put any money out. The attorney is banking on the fact that they're going to be able to collect on the back end, and then they're collecting 25, 30, sometimes 40% of that fee. So if there's not that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, well, then they're not willing to shell out their own money to fight that case.
And I'm just going to use this as anecdotal evidence, but I was driving back, I live in Las Vegas, and I was driving back from the Strip to my home, which is about 20 miles away from the Strip. And I counted 27 billboards where it was personal injury attorneys advertising, right? There's just a ton of cases out there. And I think it's like 90% of the claims now involve an attorney. It's something huge, right? They're looking for the deep pockets.
And if you think about it, in Vegas, what do we have here? Casinos. Who has deep pockets? Casinos do. So it makes sense that that's such a big industry out here.
And it's crazy. And something we did here, and this was a case, it was a mold case, where they went after a landlord. And they went after the landlord because they could see where he lived. And it was a property that was in Colorado, but they could see that his home address was actually in California, and what they perceived as a very wealthy area. So the attorney actually mentioned that, is you have something to lose, my client doesn't. And we've heard that repeatedly over the last 30 years. And it makes you a little bit queasy when you hear it, because you're like, gosh bless it, that should not be a factor. But it is, it's just reality. So you got to get those assets out of your name. And now when we say get it out of your name, are we saying get rid of it, or are we talking about just disguising it from a public record standpoint?
Yes, give it all away. I'm just kidding. No, we're disguising it from a public record standpoint. So for example, I run our land trust and deed department at Anderson Advisors, and if I have either your name or your address, I don't even need both of them. I can go to any of the 3,000 plus counties in the United States and pull up the deed that was signed that gave you ownership of the property. This likely has your name on it, as well as your address where your property tax statements are being sent, likely your home address. I can look up on the assessor's website the exact makeup of your home, whether it's multifamily, where it's single family, how much you purchased for, what the fair market value of it is, and I can even pull your tax statement. And so with that, I'm able to create a picture, even just looking on Google Maps, of how nice your house is. And then from that additional information, using other programs and tools and asset searches to eventually just find everything that you own.
Yeah, we're talking about your cars, your boats, your house, and more importantly, your rental properties, the assets that I believe I can levy on. That really becomes something, because again, at the end of the day, they want to recover. So what do you do? What do you tell somebody who comes into you and says, Amanda, I want to make sure that my name's not sticking out there to where I attract a lawsuit. I want to prevent the lawsuit from ever occurring.
Yeah, so for rental properties specifically, these are businesses, so let's put them into an anonymous business structure. We're typically starting with Wyoming because from the public record standpoint, Wyoming gives business owners privacy, meaning that if you go to the Secretary of State website, it doesn't show who owns the LLCs or who manages them. So you can own property and own other LLCs within a Wyoming holding company and no one can trace it back to you. From there, we're working differently depending on the state. Not all of states give that type of privacy. So if you're in a state like, let's say Florida, that publishes manager or member information, and again, it's not even on the initial filing. States require you to annually report for these LLCs. So I had a client just this weekend who set up their own Tennessee LLC. The initial filing didn't ask for manager or member information, and so she thought she was going to be anonymous. She purchased a property in it, and in her case, it wasn't even a legal privacy issue. It was a safety issue. She has a stalker, and the FBI is involved. And so looking at it, sure, you're anonymous now, but when that annual filing comes due, guess what the state's going to ask for? Manager and member information, and that's going to be easily traced back to her. You can go to websites like opencorporates.com, plug in a name, and see every single business entity that they are a manager, a member, a director, an organizer even. So setting up your own structures can even compromise that anonymity there.
Yeah, like don't go out and do your, like Google yourself, start looking around, because you might not be able to sleep. But is there a fix? So like for that particular gal that was at the event and that you met with, is there something you can do after the fact to still get her name out of the public record?
In this particular situation, because simply owning rentals in Tennessee was not considered doing business, we're actually going to take her Tennessee LLC and move it, domesticate it into Wyoming, where she isn't going to have that annual report. But it's very specific. Different states, like I said, have very different rules. I mean, we can just look at a map on the political spectrum and see where the lines are drawn. And that's generally a good idea of how much privacy a state's willing to give you versus how much they're not. So the best time to start is before you've tried to DIY this yourself. It's much harder for us to come in and fix something. In this woman's case, it was fairly easy, but we've seen entire structures that are not anonymous that we need to essentially dismantle and start from scratch. And then at that point, especially with property, you're getting into having to move property from one place to another, doing a lot of deed transfers to try to cover up those tracks. It's really better to start from the beginning, where we can do state-specific LLCs, and then even if those states publish manager or member information, guess what? It's not you that directly owns that property or that LLC anymore. It's all under this umbrella holding company, which is anonymous. So if you've got a tenant, they can look up who owns their property. They see that it's an LLC. Based on the deed, they don't necessarily see even which state this LLC is in. So now they're stuck having to search all 50 states for this particular LLC. If you're using generic names, guess what? Maybe there's 4 or 5 states that have a 123 Main Street LLC. And so now they're hitting roadblocks and they're hitting dead ends. And the harder we make it for a lawyer snoop to see whether or not there's a pot of gold at the end, the more likely they're just going to give up.
And I liken it to, like, you remember how you used to put doggy be gone on your couch so the dogs don't jump on it? We call it attorney be gone. Is if they see that there's actually a plan in place before something occurs, they tend to not want to jump up on it, right? We just see that for the most part, our clients never get sued. And by the way, I can do a direct comparison. We actually had family members that co-owned a piece of property where there was a liability. One of them was our client and had anonymity, and the other one didn't. And the treatment of those two people couldn't be different. It took 4 years for the non-anonymous, not our client, family member, to get out of that suit, and it cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars and a lot of time. Our client was out lickety-split right at the beginning because they didn't think they had anything to collect on. And we've seen that over the years, but that works so efficiently. Now, what about other assets, things like my brokerage account or my bank account? And I'm just sitting here going, boy, somebody could so easily take that. There's nothing I can do about it, is there?
There is actually. So with a bank or a brokerage account, we're not necessarily worried about that being on the public record. You're not going to a bank, opening a bank account, and then the bank's turning around and putting your personal information out there for anyone to see. What we're more concerned about is at the point when liability does attach to you, when somebody has a lien against you or a judgment against you, they can actually attach it to any bank or brokerage account that has your social security number on it. So even if they don't know about it, they can simply send this judgment letter to every bank that they can think of, and if you happen to have an account there, it's gonna attach and they're gonna be able to garnish it. So in these cases, we use trusts. We like to use privacy banking trusts. These trusts get their own EIN. So if a judgment comes for your social security number, well, now those numbers, the number on the judgment and the number on the account, aren't going to match, and so it's going to stay safe.
Now, what about a brokerage account? Would you use an LLC, or would you use a trust for that as well?
We use a combination, so it depends on how you currently own your brokerage account. So first, yes, investing, being a trader, that can be considered a business activity. So yes, let's put that into an LLC, because when we're looking at liability, we're looking at inside and outside liability. Is this asset going to cause some liability that we want to protect ourselves from, but then the reverse as well? Obviously, nobody is going out and tripping over a stock and then suing you, right? So we're not worried about liability from that direction. But we don't want somebody who's suing you and has a judgment against you to be able to just liquidate or reach into your brokerage account. So let's put that firewall there. Let's put a Wyoming LLC. We've got that corporate veil. The only way for that creditor to reach into that LLC is by placing a charging order on it. And what a charging order is means that if the member takes a distribution, then the creditor can take some of that distribution. But what if you never take a distribution? Well, then your funds stay within the brokerage account. You can keep investing, you can keep growing, and your creditor's never going to get it. Eventually, they'll give up or settle for a much smaller amount. Now, if you have the brokerage account in your personal name now, and you have a brokerage that will allow you to easily transfer it to an LLC, that can be as easy as filling out a form and signing it for them. Some brokerage firms don't allow for business LLC or business accounts, in which case we'll move it to a trust first and then connect the trust to the LLC. So it's likely the same form that you're asking to move that account. Instead of checking the box for LLC, you check the box for a trust, and then we're connecting the two. So you're still getting the same asset protection there.
And brokerages are familiar with trusts because most people, at least if they have some if they're trying to do any sort of estate planning, chances are they're being led to a living trust because they're so effective, much, much better in our opinion than simple wills, because you can avoid the probate process. But let's just say that they're used to that. That's essentially what a privacy trust is. It's a grantor trust. It's not there for tax purposes. It's there for title purposes, and boy, do they work effective. And so we've covered rental properties. I imagine we can do this with some businesses, like let's say I own some stocks, plus if I have publicly traded stocks. But the big one that a lot of people ask about is, what about my house? What can I do to protect my house?
Yeah, the personal residence can be tricky because if you're not using it for business purposes, we don't want to put it into an LLC because that creates another problem for ourselves. If we're in a judgment and they get a judgment against you and they pull up all of your assets and they see your structure, they're going to be looking for ways to poke holes into it. And if you've got your primary residence in an LLC, your boat in an LLC, your jet skis, your jewelry, your pet in an LLC, well, then their argument's going to be, this entire structure is a mere sham. They're putting personal assets into business entities, and then they're going to ask the court to essentially treat all of the LLCs and business entities as personal assets. So we don't want to put our primary residence into an LLC. What we're looking for here is going to be privacy, right? If we don't have that target on our back, if nobody can see what our assets are, then it's security through obscurity. So we're going to use what we call a personal residence trust. And like you mentioned, living trust, it's the exact same type of trust. It's revocable, it's a grantor trust, but instead of naming it after yourself and with you as the trustee, we're going to give it a very generic name, typically after the property, 123 Main Street Trust. And then you're going to either use a Wyoming LLC to act as your trustee, or you can use a third-party attorney to act as the trustee. So when I go and look up your property address just on the internet, as it's so easy to do, I don't see your name associated with that property anymore. It says an attorney's name and a trust name. And guess what? That trust is not recorded anywhere, so nobody can read the documents or see who the beneficiaries are.
Yeah, and unfortunately in this day and age, people like to use the angle of knowing where you live as a lever and to get some leverage on you. So when they sue, they like to serve you at home. It might be during a party, it might be at night, it might be something that they mean just to make you aware that they know exactly where you are.
Yeah.
And this puts an end to that nonsense. And even more importantly, I have friends that are in law enforcement. They get their names out of the public record for obvious reasons. And then I have other clients and friends that are doctors or people. And I remember a psychiatrist telling me the biggest worry was people showing up because they want medication. They want to talk at 3 a.m. Like some of these people are not well, and they were just, get my name out of the public record, please, so these people can't show up at my home. And my partner, Clint, you know Clint, he used to have tenants show up at his house and harass his mother. And it's like, the whole key here is don't have your personal address, don't have your personal name in the public record.
Yeah.
There's ways to get it out. Amanda's an expert at doing that. Now let's shift gears here just for a second. There's a lot of people out there teaching a bunch of strategies. Take it offshore, we'll go to whatever, Belize, or we'll go or do whatever the soup du jour is, right? What are some of the more egregious situations you've seen online where people are doing some bizarre stuff? Yeah,
any trust that, as a U.S. citizen that is offshore, is going to sound attractive because you have these other countries, they maybe have stricter privacy rules or stricter asset protection rules, but guess what? Who's still in the United States? You are. So if it gets to the point where you're in front of a court, sure, they may not be able to compel that other jurisdiction or compel that foreign trustee to bring any assets back into the United States to pay your creditor, but guess what they can compel? They can compel you as the beneficiary to do that. So if you're faced with fines, penalties, even jail time, you're not usually gonna risk that just to not pay a creditor, right?
And there's been plenty of cases where people actually were held in contempt because they didn't bring the asset back on shore. And the old joke was, would you be willing to go to jail for 10 million bucks, right? There was a case, I think it was the Anderson case.
Yeah.
And they literally just said, hey, bring it back or we're going to hold you in contempt. And they hold you in contempt. Some states, they have a period of days of how many days you can be held. It might be 180 days, but still, you're out of control. And then more importantly, I've seen this happen over and over again. You can't get the asset back either. You move it offshore and you think you're a genius because they won't listen to a U.S. court. Well, just remember, they won't listen to a U.S. court. If you move your money into a jurisdiction, all too often I've seen this happen, where the trustee absconds with the money or just quits responding or closes their doors, and you're like, wait a second, where's my money? Well, remember why you put it over there in the first place. You thought that
It's
you were
safe,
so, yep.
even from you.
Yep. Yeah, unfortunately, safety is illusionary or illusory in that situation because you may never get it back.
Yeah.
What other ones are there?
The hot one these days is called a Vortex trust.
Oh, that's a tax scam.
Yes, and so it's a tax scam disguised as an asset protection scam, and the idea is that they're stacking multiple trusts on top of each other, and then creating fee schedules so that one trust is paying another trust is paying another. It's essentially a complex way of saying they're cooking the books so that at the end of the day, the no taxes owed. I mean, the IRS is already onto this. They have blatantly stated this is tax fraud, this is not allowed. The legal concept that these creators and proponents of the Vortex Trust are sort of laying down on the sword on is that income to a trust isn't income. Well, right in the beginning of that sentence, it says it's income. So those are, the IRS is going after those pretty hard. They published the Dirty Dozen list of things of tax scams and frauds, and so those Vortex trusts are up there.
And there's actually, Chief Counsel wrote an opinion on this because it is so flagrant, was the idea that somehow adding money to corpus under this guise, that does not mean it's not taxable. It might be that it's not taxable as distributable net income to a beneficiary, but the trust is still obligated.
Yeah.
And even more importantly, some of these people are now shifting over and calling it churches. They're doing these 501As, and they'll have this ghost LLC where they'll say, it's a disregard LLC to this, and boy, you never have to pay tax again. And they're missing the whole point of our tax laws, which is if you are conferring benefit to yourself, it is going to be a taxable benefit.
That's one of the first things they teach you in a law school tax class. If I cut Toby's hair and he gives me a chicken for that, well, I have to pay tax on the value of that chicken. Even though just because it's not money, it doesn't mean that there's not a value. It's an ascension to wealth. Now, must be a gold chicken if it's considered an ascension to wealth, but we're paying tax on anything that is increasing our net worth, our value, our ascension to wealth, regardless of what form that's taking.
But what they're doing is they're using trusts and LLCs that are in a legal way, kind of sounds odd, right? They're using what's an actual instrument. They're just misusing it. They're using it for the wrong reason, and they've misread. And quite often these folks are influencers online. They're telling you crazy stuff like you can write off a Rolex or you can do all this funny stuff, and they're throwing the tax into it, but they're building it off of something that would actually be almost a decent strategy if you were just looking at it from an asset protection, which is get it out of my name. They've just taken it to an extraordinarily ridiculous stretch of saying, hey, you can live in that house, you can take all your kids and you can write off all the meals and everything. No, you can't. That's personal benefit. I'm sorry. But
oh, and by the way, pay us $10, $50, $60, $100,000 to manage it for you every year.
Yeah, and you're not going to pay any taxes, but you know, and as a bonus, you're going to get a free orange jumpsuit and 3 hots and a cot, right, if they catch you. And they do break these things, by the way. But those are the ones. The big ones I see are the offshore. And then the people that domestically don't know what they're doing, and they create some pretty bizarre structures. Keep it simple. Get your name out of the public record seems to be the name of the game.
Yep.
I personally believe that you use entities that are typically filed with the state. The trust might be an exception because it's title holding, but when we actually use the asset protection, there's very few states that give asset protections directly to a grantor trust, like a land trust. And so generally you're going to marry that to an LLC. And I like that. I like the idea of me paying a state for a benefit and that state standing behind it and giving me protection. How about you?
Yeah, because the states write those laws. I mean, limited liability companies have been around for decades, and the case law supporting them and that structure is there. The courts agree, and the fees to the states are generally fairly minimal once you've got it set up. It's not going to cost a lot to maintain, and people know. They know what the corporate veil is. They know the factors that are going to pierce that veil, and so as long as you're running your business and dotting your I's, crossing your T's, using your separate bank accounts, not commingling money, having your 1 or 2 meetings a year to legitimize your business, you're going to be on the right track.
All right, well, thank you for being here. Guys, just go and put, if you have a question, go ahead and throw it down in the comments. If you'd like to have a meeting with somebody to look at your situation to see whether this type of planning is appropriate, to get your name out of the public record so that you appear penniless to third parties and lawyers and snoops and all that, then just write consult down in the comments. Just put consult. So if you have a question, go ahead and leave it. If you'd like to have a meeting, type consult, and if you can like and subscribe, it really helps our channel out. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Toby. Thanks for having me.